What happens when a bold TV host takes a shot at embarrassing a powerful entrepreneur on live television? The answer. Maya Carter's comeback had the entire studio frozen in silence. Maya wasn't just another face in the business world. At only 33, she had built an empire with her own two hands, a company that didn't just fuel her personal success, but also lifted up the people around her. Raised in Atlanta, Georgia, she believed wealth meant nothing if it didn't unlock opportunities for others. Her latest passion project? A groundbreaking program dedicated to giving young Black women the mentorship, resources, and guidance they needed to start businesses of their own. So, when The Daily View, one of the most watched talk shows in the country, invited her on, she said yes without hesitation. It wasn't just about her story. It was about shining a light on the young women she was helping and proving to the world what talent, determination, and community could create when given the chance. But there was a twist. The host that day, Vanessa Stone, was famous for her razor-sharp tongue and a reputation for stirring the pot. She thrived on controversy, admired by some, dreaded by others. Still, Maya wasn't fazed. Life had already tested her in far tougher arenas than a heated Q&A. This wasn't a threat, it was her stage, and she was ready. The morning of the interview, Maya stepped into the New York City studio wearing a teal suit that radiated the same confidence she carried within. The makeup artist couldn't help but tell her how stunning she looked. Maya smiled politely, though deep down her nerves fluttered like butterflies ready to escape. The studio buzzed with cameras, lights, crew chatter, and a murmuring audience. On set, Vanessa greeted her with a smile that looked more like a challenge than a welcome. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vanessa announced to thunderous applause, "please welcome Maya Carter, a self-made entrepreneur who claims she's rewriting the rules of business." The introduction had a bite, but Maya met it with grace. She leaned forward, her warm, steady smile lighting up the room. "Thank you, Vanessa. I'm excited to be here and to share some of the work we've been doing." The first moments were smooth. Maya began telling her story, how she went from a teenager hustling handmade jewelry at flea markets to becoming the founder of a multimillion-dollar company. The audience leaned in closer. But then, Vanessa leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. And that's when the interview took a turn. At first, the conversation seemed ordinary. Vanessa nodded, smiled, and tossed in the occasional question. But Maya began to notice a slight edge creeping into her tone, a shift so subtle most people would have missed it. Then it came. Vanessa tilted her head in that trademark way of hers, feigning curiosity, and asked, "So, Maya, do you think initiatives like yours even exist because people simply aren't working hard enough?" The room seemed to hold its breath. The tension was thin, but it was there, lingering just beneath the surface. Maya, calm and unshaken, leaned in with grace. "It's not about people failing to work hard," she said softly but firmly. "It's about acknowledging that real barriers exist, and then building pathways that help people overcome them." The audience responded with polite applause, though Vanessa's grin only grew sharper, like she had just set a trap. But Maya had no idea how deep Vanessa was willing to push. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more. Let's continue. Vanessa tapped her fingers on the table, leaned forward, and delivered the next blow. "I hear you," she said, her nod rehearsed, almost mocking. "But don't you think talking about barriers just sounds like excuses? After all, isn't the American dream about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps? Plenty of people have done it, haven't they?" The crowd shifted, some clapping, others restless, a few exchanging uneasy looks. It was the kind of question designed to corner someone, to make them stumble. But Maya had heard this before, maybe not on national television, but in classrooms, boardrooms, even family dinners. She knew the script. She met Vanessa's eyes, steady and unbothered. "The American dream is beautiful in theory," Maya replied. "But it overlooks something important. Not everyone starts at the same place. Some people's boots don't even have laces. And worse, sometimes those boots are taken from them before they ever get a chance to wear them." The crowd erupted with laughter and applause. Maya smiled, seizing the moment. "What my program does," she continued, "isn't about handing people success. It's about giving them back their laces. They still have to tie their shoes and walk their own path, but at least now, they can take that first step." The audience cheered, but Vanessa wasn't done. She leaned in, her eyes narrowing just slightly. And that's when the interview took a turn no one saw coming. Vanessa's smile grew thinner, her eyes flicking quickly toward the producers behind the cameras, as if silently recalibrating her next move. Maya had landed a strong point, but Vanessa wasn't one to retreat. Well, Vanessa began, her tone sugar-coated but carrying a sharp undercurrent. That's a nice metaphor. But some would argue that by talking so much about race and inequality, you're actually fueling division. Shouldn't we be focusing on unity instead of calling out differences? The studio air grew heavier. For a moment Maya tilted her head, reflecting, before she spoke with measured calm. Unity sounds beautiful, she said gently, but you can't build a bridge without first acknowledging the river beneath it. Pretending the river isn't there doesn't unite people, it leaves them stranded on opposite shores. The words landed hard. Applause rose, this time louder, stronger, undeniable. Even Vanessa's polished exterior faltered for a split second, a crack in her carefully maintained composure. But just as quickly, she straightened, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Fair enough, Vanessa conceded, though her voice sharpened. But let's get specific. Your program focuses exclusively on young Black women. Why not open it to everyone? Doesn't that make it exclusionary? For a split second, Maya felt the familiar flicker of irritation. It wasn't the first time she'd been asked this. In fact, it was almost predictable, an old challenge dressed in new words. She steadied herself and leaned into the mic. It's not exclusionary, Maya said, her voice firm but calm. It's intentional. When you see where the cracks are, you don't rebuild the whole wall, you start where the damage is. If a roof leaks in one corner of the house, you don't tear the whole house down. You fix the leak. My program addresses a very real, very specific gap, and by doing that, we strengthen the entire community. The audience erupted again, this time with undeniable energy. People leaned forward, nodding, clapping louder, their momentum shifting toward Maya. But just as the room seemed to tilt fully in her favor, Vanessa adjusted her posture, her eyes glinting with something new. She had been saving her hardest question for last, and what came next would silence the studio in a way no one expected. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, arms folded, as though bracing for her next strike. Her voice carried that familiar blend of skepticism and fake curiosity. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, she said smoothly, but isn't there a risk that programs like yours actually encourage dependency? The studio tensed. You could feel the energy shift. All eyes turned to Maya. Maya's eyebrow arched ever so slightly, the faint trace of a smile curving at her lips. She knew this tactic well. Poke, prod, try to rattle. But she wasn't about to let Vanessa own the narrative. If anything, the question had given her the opening she needed. Dependency? Maya repeated, her tone calm but lined with quiet fire. Let me ask you something, Vanessa. When banks give entrepreneurs loans to launch their businesses, is that dependency, or is it providing the resources needed to grow? The audience leaned in. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Before Vanessa could respond, Maya pressed forward. Because that's exactly what this program is. It's not a handout, it's an investment. It equips young women with the tools to stand on their own, to build something sustainable, and to create opportunities not only for themselves but for others as well. The problem isn't dependency. The problem is lack of opportunity. The room erupted. Applause filled the studio. Louder, longer, undeniable. Even a few members of the production team behind the cameras were nodding along, unable to hide their agreement. And for the first time, Vanessa's polished mask slipped, just slightly. But the real question was, how far was she willing to push before the tension snapped completely? Vanessa shifted in her seat, crossing her legs tightly and tilting her head, not with curiosity this time, but with a defensiveness she couldn't quite mask. Well, Maya, she said, her voice now clipped and sharper than before, you've made a fair point. But you must understand why some people feel left out when programs are so narrowly targeted. We live in an era where everyone wants to feel included, don't you think? The audience leaned in. It was a question meant to sound reasonable, but there was something loaded beneath it. Maya's smile softened into something more resolute. She leaned forward, folding her hands together, her voice calm but unshakable. Inclusion matters, of course it does. But inclusion doesn't mean pretending that all struggles are the same. Think about it this way. If one child in a classroom is falling behind, you don't hold the entire class back just to keep things even. You give that child the extra support they need to catch up. And when they succeed, the whole class benefits. The room went still. Not an awkward silence, but the kind that carries weight, like everyone knew they had just heard something that couldn't easily be dismissed. But Vanessa, ever the provocateur, wasn't about to let the moment end there. She leaned back, smirk tugging at her lips, her eyes glinting with mischief. The kind of look that said she was about to stir the pot again. Interesting take, she replied smoothly. But let me flip this on you, Maya. Don't you worry that by talking so much about race, you're actually keeping those divides alive? Wouldn't it be better, she paused for effect, to focus only on what unites us? And that was the moment the air in the studio shifted again, because everyone could sense Maya's answer was about to change everything. Maya drew in a breath, ready to respond, but Vanessa cut her off, her words sharp as glass. I mean, some might say programs like yours are just another form of segregation. Isn't that ironic? The words landed like a punch. The room reacted instantly. Gasps rippled through the audience, a few shaking their heads in disbelief. The tension was no longer subtle. It was thick, alive, pressing against everyone's chest. For the first time, emotion flickered across Maya's face. Not weakness, something between disbelief and quiet fire. She glanced at the audience, taking in their outrage, their support, before fixing her gaze back on Vanessa. What's ironic, Maya began, her voice low but firm, is how easily people twist equity into something it isn't. Segregation was about locking people out, denying them access. What I'm doing, it's the opposite. I'm opening doors that have been sealed shut for generations. The audience erupted with applause, loud and certain. But Maya wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength with every word. And do you know what's truly ironic, Vanessa? That when we finally try to repair the damage left behind by those very systems, we're accused of being divisive. The truth is, you can't heal what you refuse to admit is broken. The room exploded, cheers, claps, even a few people rising to their feet. It was a wave Maya rode with steady grace. Vanessa, however, froze for the briefest moment. Her smile faltered, her polished armor cracking before she forced it back into place. But behind her eyes was something else, a spark that told everyone she wasn't done. And then, just when it seemed Maya had landed the final blow, Vanessa leaned forward again, ready to push the confrontation into dangerous new territory. Vanessa leaned back, her face calm but her eyes flashing with the frustration she couldn't quite hide. The audience's thunderous applause had tilted the energy of the room, and for the first time, it was clear. Vanessa was scrambling to reclaim control. Well, Maya, she said, her tone honeyed but edged like glass, you always seem to have an answer. But let's get real. There are hardworking people out there, struggling every day, who look at what you're doing and think, what about us? Aren't you leaving them behind? How is that fair? The question drew a ripple through the audience. It was sharp, deliberate, a trap. Maya blinked, not shocked by the words, but by the attempt to twist her work into something selfish. Her jaw tightened for a heartbeat, then softened, her resolve settling in like steel. Fair. Maya repeated, her voice low but steady, every syllable deliberate. Tell me, Vanessa, when a firefighter puts out a burning house, do we accuse them of being unfair to the homes that aren't on fire? Or do we thank them for protecting the neighborhood? The silence that followed was electric. Not awkward, charged. The kind that pulled everyone in the studio closer, waiting. Even the crew behind the cameras had stilled, eyes locked on Maya. That's what this program is, she continued, her voice unwavering. It's about putting out fires, about meeting the urgent needs of people who've been ignored and overlooked for far too long. And when they rise, when they finally thrive, it doesn't steal from anyone else, it strengthens the entire community. The applause was instant, rising like a wave. But Maya wasn't done. She lifted a hand, not rudely, but firmly enough to signal that the floor was still hers. And let's be honest, she added, her voice cutting through the air like truth itself. These conversations about fairness? They're rarely about fairness at all. They're about comfort. Whose comfort are we defending? Whose discomfort are we choosing to ignore? If fixing injustice makes people uneasy, then maybe discomfort is exactly what we should be willing to live with. The crowd roared, but Vanessa's lips curved into a tight smile. And in that moment, everyone sensed it. Vanessa wasn't finished. She was about to cross a line Maya hadn't seen coming. The audience erupted, cheers, claps, even a standing ovation that shook the studio. Maya stayed composed, sitting tall, but the fire in her eyes told the story. She knew her words had struck exactly where they needed to. Vanessa, however, wasn't faring as well. Her mask of control was slipping. She grabbed her water, sipped quickly, then forced out a laugh that didn't quite land. "Well, Maya," she said, her voice thinner now, "you're certainly passionate. I can see why your program has so many supporters. But let me ask." Maya cut in, polite but firm. "Before you ask me anything else, Vanessa, let me ask you something." She leaned forward, and instantly the room followed her lead, the audience hanging on her next words. When we hear stories about people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, do we ever stop to ask, who made the boots? And who decided which ones were worth investing in? The question sliced through the studio, like a blade. Vanessa froze. It wasn't just clever, it was direct, dismantling the very narrative she'd been leaning on. The audience went silent, not out of doubt but in awe, waiting to see what would happen next. And as Maya's words lingered in the air, one thing became clear. This exchange wasn't just another TV moment. What happened next would be remembered far beyond the walls of that studio. Vanessa sat frozen, her sharp tongue uncharacteristically still. For once, words failed her. The camera zoomed in, catching the hesitation, the tiny crack in her polished exterior. Across from her, Maya sat with effortless calm, hands folded, eyes steady, the picture of grace under pressure. The audience buzzed with energy, whispers running through the crowd like electricity. Then someone shouted, "Say it louder." The room broke into laughter and applause. Maya's smile spread, warm and unshaken. The moment was hers. Vanessa cleared her throat, forcing out a line that sounded more like surrender than debate. "Well, Maya, I suppose we'll have to agree to disagree. But I do appreciate your perspective." Her tone was tight, her confidence replaced by strained civility. Maya didn't hesitate. "And I appreciate the chance to share it," she replied smoothly, her voice polite but firm. Another subtle masterclass in composure. The producers cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The live audience was buzzing, and even before the cameras stopped rolling, the reaction had spilled online. Within minutes, hashtags like #MayaCarter and #MorningPerspective were trending. Clips of her sharpest moments flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. "She said what we've all been waiting to hear," one tweet declared, already racking up thousands of likes. Another clip, captioned "Putting out fires, not ignoring them," was reposted by influencers, activists, and even celebrities. Backstage, Maya finally exhaled. Her phone lit up nonstop, texts from friends, emails from supporters, messages from strangers. One after another, young women thanked her for giving them a voice. But even as Maya scrolled, taking in the love, one thought lingered. This moment wasn't just going viral. It was about to change everything. Of course, not everyone was cheering. Some critics called her divisive, others accused her of being too bold, too unapologetic, too much. But Maya had seen it all before. She knew the pushback wasn't about her tone. It was about her refusal to shrink so others could stay comfortable. And she wasn't about to apologize for that. Later that night, in her hotel room overlooking downtown New York City, Maya replayed the day in her mind. The interview had been tough, yes, but it was also a chance to speak truth on a stage where millions were listening. She thought of the young women her program touched, girls who might see that clip one day and recognize themselves in her strength, her resilience, her refusal to bend. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Her assistant peeked in, smiling. "You're everywhere right now." CNN just picked up the story. They're calling it one of the most powerful live TV moments of the year. Maya shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It's not about me," she said softly. "It's about the message." Her assistant grinned, holding up her phone. "Well, the message just got a major cosign. Rihanna reposted the clip." Maya let out a laugh, the weight of the day briefly lifting. "Well," she said, "if Queen Bey says so, who am I to argue?" The buzz didn't fade. For weeks, headlines, think pieces, and endless social media posts dissected every second of the exchange. But for Maya, the victory wasn't in the trending hashtags or celebrity shoutouts. It was in knowing that young women now saw proof that someone was standing for them, creating space where none existed. And just when it seemed like things had reached their peak, an unexpected twist was about to push Maya's story even further into the spotlight. Even as Maya looked ahead, she understood this was only the beginning. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Headlines, mentions, messages. Every ping was another ripple of her words spreading further than she could have imagined. But Maya wasn't caught up in the noise. Her mind was already moving, thinking of how to turn this moment into fuel, how to push her program forward, how to make sure the women she fought for were the ones whose voices carried loudest. By noon, she was back in her hometown. At the community center, a crowd of young women from her program waited eagerly. Among them was Jasmine, a 19-year-old, clutching her phone with trembling hands. Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped closer. "Miss Maya," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I watched the interview. I saw how you stood up for us, for all of us. And I just want to say thank you. You made me believe I can do anything." Maya's chest tightened, her smile warm as she rested a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "Jasmine," she said softly, "you don't need me to give you that power. It's already in you. All I'm doing is giving you the tools to see it for yourself." The room fell quiet, the weight of her words hanging in the air. And in that silence, it became clear. This movement was about to grow into something far bigger than any of them had expected. Later that afternoon, Maya gathered a small circle of young women from her program. She spoke about the talk show, about the pushback, and about the lessons carved from that moment. "Here's the truth," she said, her voice calm but burning with conviction. "The world won't always give you respect or fairness. Sometimes you'll have to claim it. Sometimes you'll have to fight for it. And when that time comes, I need you to remember this. Your story, your voice, your worth, they're not negotiable." The room went silent, but not with hesitation. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that said every word had landed. Maya looked around and saw it in their eyes. Resolve, fire, readiness. These young women weren't just listening. They were preparing. As the sun dipped low that evening, Maya stepped outside, pausing to take it all in. The path hadn't been easy. Roadblocks, doubt, and resistance had shadowed her steps. But through it all, she had held firm to her purpose. To inspire, to open doors, to leave things better than she found them. Her story was proof that standing up for what matters isn't always comfortable, but it is always necessary. Because whether it's on a national stage or in your own neighborhood, a single voice can ignite something bigger. And yet, as Maya walked away from the center that night, she sensed it. The real test of her message was only just beginning. If this story struck a chord, like, share, and subscribe for inspiring stories.